Most people think history is a straight line, but in the world of money, history is a circle. On February 20, 2026, the highest court in the United States delivered a shock to the global financial system. In a 6-3 decision, the Supreme Court struck down the administration's use of the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEPA, as a tool for global tariffs. The court was clear: the president does not have the constitutional authority to tax. But if you think the trade war ended on the steps of the Supreme Court, you are not paying attention. Within hours of the ruling, the administration pivoted. They reached into the legislative archives and pulled out Section 122 of the 1974 Trade Act, imposing a new flat 10% global surcharge on almost every product entering this country. We have seen this before. In June 1930, two men, Smoot and Hawley, proposed a plan to protect America. They promised it would save jobs and fix the economy. Instead, it lit the fuse on the Great Depression. Today, in 2026, the echoes are deafening. We are walking into a trap that was set nearly a century ago. Today, we peel back the layers of financial history to see what happens to a superpower when it builds walls and the rest of the world builds a bypass. To understand 2026, we have to live through 1930. The US was reeling from the 1929 stock market crash. Panic was in the air. Senator Reed Smoot and Representative Willis Hawley believed that the only way to save the American worker was to shut out the world. They proposed raising tariffs on over 20,000 imported items. The warning signs were everywhere. Over 1,000 economists, the brightest minds of the era, signed a public petition begging President Herbert Hoover to veto the bill. They warned that it would raise the cost of living for struggling families and, more dangerously, force other nations to hit back. Hoover ignored them. He signed the bill into law on June 17, 1930. The retaliation was instant. Within months, 25 of our trading partners filed formal protests and raised their own walls. Canada, our largest partner at the time, retaliated with its own massive tariffs. Global trade did not just slow down, it evaporated. Between 1929 and 1933, US exports plummeted by 61%. The protection did not save a single job. In fact, US unemployment, which was at 8.7% when the bill passed, spiraled to 25% by 1933. The world had stopped talking. The world had stopped trading. And a recession turned into a decade of darkness. Fast forward to February 2026. For over a year, the US has operated under a national emergency tariff regime. But the Supreme Court ruling in Learning Resources Inc. versus Trump has officially declared that the emergency cannot be used to bypass Congress's power to tax. Yet, the walls did not come down. The invocation of Section 122 is a desperate maneuver. This law allows for a temporary 150-day tariff specifically to address a balance of payments deficit. By February 22nd, the administration even threatened to push that surcharge to 15%. The numbers are already starting to bite. Data from the Tax Foundation shows that these trade barriers have added a $1,300 annual tax burden on the average American household. We are not just taxing foreigners, we are taxing the American consumer at the checkout counter. And just like in 1930, the tit-for-tat has begun. The European Union has already suspended its bilateral trade obligations, seeking clarity on whether these new Section 122 duties violate the 15% reciprocal cap. The pillars of the global marketplace are beginning to shake, but there is a massive difference between 1930 and 2026. In 1930, the US was a creditor nation. The world owed us money. Today, we are the world's largest debtor. As of late January 2026, the US national debt hit $38.5 trillion. For the first time in our history, the net interest payments on that debt, totaling over $270 billion in just the first quarter of the fiscal year, have officially surpassed the nation's entire defense spending. Think about that. We are spending more to service the past than we are to protect the future. In 1930, we had the fiscal room to make mistakes. In 2026, We do not. When you combine massive debt with trade walls, you create a toxic cocktail called stagflation, where prices go up, but growth stops. The IMF has already warned that this trajectory poses a global stability risk. If you are enjoying this Money Echoes episode, make sure to subscribe. If the world stops buying our goods and stops lending us money to fund our debt, the cycle of empire acceleration moves into its final, most volatile stage. Let us look at what this actually means for the person on the street. Imagine you are a single mother in 2026. You are already dealing with 4% inflation and rising electricity prices. You go to buy your child a pair of sneakers. In 2024, those shoes might have cost $60, but because of the tariff stack, the combination of Section 232 duties on materials and the new Section 122 global surcharge, the effective tax on those shoes is now near 40%. Those $60 shoes are now $84. To the wealthy, this is a rounding error. But to that mother, it is a regressive tax. Tariffs are essentially a flat tax on consumption. Higher-income households spend most of their money on services, stocks, and travel, things that are not taxed at the border. But the working class spends the majority of their income on things, shoes, clothes, electronics, car parts. By building these trade walls, we are effectively telling the poorest Americans that they must pay a premium to protect an industrial base that has not existed in their town for 30 years. It is a transfer of wealth from the consumer to the government, disguised as patriotism. While we are focused on Supreme Court and Section 122, the rest of the world is not just waiting for us to figure it out. They are building a bypass. As of February 2026, India is leading a new BRICS payment system designed specifically to rival SWIFT and the US dollar. It is called the CBDC bridge. While we are using 1930s tactics, they are using 2026 technology. By using central bank digital currencies, countries such as China, India, and Brazil can settle trade directly in their own currencies within seconds. No New York bank, no US jurisdiction, no dollar needed. The N-Bridge platform has already processed over $55 billion in transactions. This is the ultimate retaliation. In 1930, countries hit back with their own tariffs. In 2026, they are hitting back by deleting the dollar from the equation entirely. If the US becomes too expensive or too volatile to trade with, the world will simply find a new house to play in. The 1930s are a warning, not a prophecy. We can learn from the Smoot-Hawley disaster, or we can repeat it. The data for February 26 is clear. GDP is slowing, household costs are rising, and our debt is a ticking time bomb. A superpower does not fall because it gets conquered. It falls because it becomes too expensive to maintain and too difficult to trade with. We are currently at a crossroads. One path leads back to the global cooperation that built the most prosperous era in human history. The other leads to the fragmented, walled-off world of the 1930s. The choice is not just up to the Supreme Court or the President. It is up to us to understand the math. Because, in the end, you cannot tax your way to prosperity any more than you can jump into a bucket and try to lift yourself up by the handle. I have detailed the full Tax Foundation report and the SCOTUS ruling in the description below. If you want to keep track of these money echoes and stay ahead of the next cycle, make sure you are subscribed, and I want to hear from you. Do you believe these tariffs are a necessary shield for American jobs? Or are we just repeating the mistakes of 1930? Let us get into the facts in the comments. I will see you in the next deep dive. History does not just repeat, it rhymes. So make sure you are listening for the next Money Echoes. Subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.